you are an elite athlete in cross country. You're equally successful in track. And in 1975, the New York Athletic Club sent you to the AAU Junior Nationals in Knoxville.
Wow.
And
How did
once
you find this
again,
out? Wow.
this was after Fordham refused to pay your expenses.
The reasoning then was because it wasn't a collegiate, it wasn't any within the NCAAs, it was the AAUs. And I went to Knoxville, and luckily Jim Rafferty, who was at the New York AC, I wore their singlet and competed well down there against one guy named Steve Scott, who turned out to be one of the greatest American milers of all time.
Yes, you qualified for the 1500-meter final and you finished fourth just behind Steve Scott, who was the second fastest American miler of all time. What a day for Gene McCarthy.
And what I think is the beauty of it is when I got into my career, my last job before I retired, I moved to Irvine, California, and who was coaching at University of California, Irvine, but Steve Scott. And it's just great to, rekindle old friendships and think about, the times we spent as kids where we didn't know any better. We just thought, our job was to make Tuesday better than Monday. And that if we keep working hard, everything will come our way. So.
And that performance earned for you All-American honors. How did you hear that Gene McCarthy was an All-American?
Well, I didn't even understand how you become an All-American. I thought the sports writers voted you in. But when you run in the NCAAs, which we did in Cobo, and we lost to Princeton just by a step, it turns out that the top three teams finishing all earn All-American status. And I had no idea until later. We put our sweats on. We were disappointed we got second. And then Tommy Byrne comes back with these trophies and then these beautiful sheaths that was an All-American certificate. And I'm like, wow, we're all Americans. I mean, it was a shock to the system. But on the other hand, it's something you always think about is like a Frank Gifford. It's like, these are these legendary people. So All-American meant the world to us. It's thrilling. I still have my plaque. It's framed, and I don't know. It means a lot. But you know what also it means a lot too? I was a Division I All-American for Fordham University.
Mm. And at the Penn Relays on the 4-mile relay team, you helped Fordham establish a school record. You also set the school record for the mile, posting a time of 4:05.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure did. Well,
Great
actually,
days.
that might have been a freshman record. All right. So
Mm-hmm.
what was interesting, going back to my magazine and always wanted to break the 4-minute mile, I ran 4:13 in high school. And then a year later, as a freshman, I ran 4:05. And I didn't really improve. You talk about, some of the trials and tribulations of, being an athlete. And what did it do to us when we couldn't go to the NCAAs? It took the wind out of our sails. I only ran, I believe, 4:03 by the time I graduated. And
In, ni- in 1977, you led the cross-country team to a sixth-place finish at the IC4As, where you ran the best time of the season, finishing eighth out of 175 competitors. And at the NCAAs, he helped Fordham place 24th in the nation. Gene McCarthy and his friends on the team were taking their place and making Fordham a force in track and field in collegiate athletics.
I don't think we looked at it, Ed, like that when we did it. I just think we ran our best and we did what we thought we were supposed to do. And a lot of that comes from, I think, I love the idea that Fordham is this beautiful 80-acre oasis in the middle of the Bronx, but it is a tough, gritty neighborhood all around it. And
Mhm.
I think we ran as much as Fordham athletes as we did as Bronx athletes. And I think that toughness is worthy of reputation as being
Served you
American.
well.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
Of all of your achievements, Gene, your best day was what?
Um, that's great. I had a lot of best days. I think my greatest achievement was I received at graduation. I received the Terrence O'Donnell Award,
Mm.
and which is a prestigious award for the athlete who shows dedication, hard work, service, leadership, all of the things that you would associate with famous Terrence O'Donnell. And I received it at graduation, knowing it was a hot May day. but with my mom and dad there, who just a few years earlier didn't know what a
Right.
college was or had ever been to a
Sure.
college campus. So it was graduation, and it wasn't necessarily an athletic achievement, but what it meant is that everything that I experienced in the prior 4 years would serve me for the next 40 or 50. And that's what I'm most proud of. And I think about it every time when I went to Fordham last week and I see the steps and Edwards Parade. That's where my head goes, with all the chairs out there and caps and gowns, and just an amazing moment and a proud moment. I remember my mom particularly being absolutely just thrilled, and also thrilled because Alan Alda was the speaker.
What about your worst day?
Um, this is a tough one. In my sophomore year, we had a time trial. It was the week after Labor Day. It was before everybody went to school. Maybe been the week before Labor Day. It was a hazy, hot, humid day. No sun, but very humid, and maybe in the 80s. And we had a time trial at Van Cortlandt, and our captain from the year prior, Bobby Burns came back to run with us. So you go out in the time trial. The goal is to see who's fit, who's not fit, to get an idea of where you stand at this stage in your training. We finished, we're drenched, and a kid comes up to us. He goes, "Are you guys from Fordham?" And we go, "Yeah." He was frantic, and he says, "One of your guys is up in the hills, and he's not breathing." So we sprinted back up into the hills, and somebody had also alerted, getting medical help, and Bobby was there, and I remember distinctly rubbing his legs. Somebody was saying, "Rub his legs, maybe blood can go up," and he wasn't moving. His lips were turning blue, and I hate to be graphic about it, but it was the worst thing that I'd ever seen. I was like 18, 19 years old. So Bobby passed away, God bless him, in the back hills. And then a couple of days later, I was living in the freshman dorm and right next to the church, University Chapel. And I was walking over to the funeral, and I broke down. I have never felt this feeling before. I just broke down. I lost my breathing, and Tommy Byrne walked me back to the dorm. I never attended the funeral, but it was the darkest day for all of us, not just on the track team, but for school. And the thing that is so hard to understand is we have this notion, if you're athletic and you're healthy and you're working out, that you're gonna be doing jumping jacks with Jack LaLanne until you're 100. And then it made no sense to anybody, never mind young people, how we could lose not only a close friend, but doing something that he was good at, being a long distance runner. It was a dark day at Fordham, and it sticks with me to this moment.
Of all the times that you broke the tape, which was the biggest win?
There was a couple on the relay team, and the reason it was because I loved the idea of having three other guys. I wasn't the anchor man in Cobo Hall in Detroit when we got second in the NCAAs, but those are the times I enjoyed the most. Was being a teammate, but probably maybe not breaking the tape, but in the IC4As, the end of my freshman year, Williamsburg, Virginia, William and Mary. And it was the first time I was in a race where it was a sub 4 minute mile race. And that's where I ran 4:05. And I will never forget it, because I was in a race with somebody that broke 4 minutes, and I was 5 seconds away. And I find out that's an eternity in a miler speak, 5 seconds. But I do remember going home that night. We drove all the way back from Williamsburg. I got into my house in Co-op City at 2 in the morning, and my dad, he came in and wanted to know what happened. And he just shook his head. It was like a proud moment. So,
Mm.
there's moments like that that mean a lot.
Biggest disappointment?
I don't think I worked hard enough. As
Really?
I don't think
Really?
I don't. And my teammates might argue. I just don't. There was something I felt that wasn't fulfilled in what happened there athletically. Academically, what an education, what a world you're served when you get a degree from Fordham University. That's why I wrote the letter to Marty Lepori after I graduated. A month later, I moved to Florida to train with him. I felt like I was missing something. And when I went down there, and I lived there for, well, a total of 8 years, but 2 years leading up to the 80 Olympic trials. When I went down there, you know what I learned, Ed? I didn't learn greater workouts. I learned this, the neck up. I
Mm,
learned an attitude. I mean, I'm working out with some of the best runners in the world, and the workouts were nothing sensational. Of course, you had to have the goods just to keep up with these
right.
guys. But I
Yes.
learned something that I wish I got more of at Fordham, which was just, the tenacity and to believe you're good enough and to know how to strategically approach a race and to think that I'm just as good as that guy, even if his personal best is better than mine. And it was that confidence that I think after Bobby died and after we didn't go to the NCAAs, a lot of the steam was taken out of this track and field machine at Fordham.
Mm. You mentioned from even the time you were a little kid that 4 minutes meant everything to you, and you never quite got there. How did you get over that mentally?
Yeah, so it's funny. I was in the Ben Franklin Mile at the Penn Relays, 35,000 people. I'm with some of the best runners in the world. And I stutter stepped on the backstretch on the final lap. And when I crossed the finish line, I could see, it's like, where's Waldo? I could see my dad with his stopwatch. And I looked at him and he just put his thumb down. So
Oh,
I ran 4:01. And if maybe it
oh,
wasn't for that starter step, but I will tell you this. In 1980, Jimmy Carter had declared that the U.S. would not go to the Olympics because they were in Moscow and their occupation of Afghanistan, and talk about taking all the life out of you. So Marty LaCory, my training partner, that might have been his last Olympics. He went skiing, in Colorado one weekend, came back with a slight injury, and he was supposed to compete in a race in Kingston, Jamaica, in May. And he was injured. So he calls the race promoter. And this is one of my favorite stories. The race promoter is a guy named John Carlos. And John Carlos, along with Tommy Smith, were the two
right,
guys.
1968, right?
Absolutely. And one of the most iconic moments and images ever in the history of sports.
Right.
John Carlos was the guy recruiting the athletes for the race, and Marty was signed to go there. And somehow Marty says, I can't do it, John. I'm injured, but I got a guy, I got a protege. And he's like, who's Gene McCarthy? So John Carlos, he sent me a plane ticket anyway. So I flew to Kingston, Jamaica, and it was a real international race. There were only two Americans in the race. And I ended up finishing third behind Philbert Bailly, who was the world record holder in 1,500 meters. This was 1,500 now because it was Olympic year. There were no
Mhm.
miles run at the time. And then the second place was Steve Ovett, who later on would win gold in Moscow from England. He then became the world record holder. And I finished third behind those guys. And I ran 3:42, which at the time, the conventional wisdom was take your 1,500-meter time, add 17 seconds. So that would come out to about a 3:59 or a 4-minute mile. So it may not be Roger Bannister's mile, but to me, it was an accomplishment and an achievement. And then a few weeks later were the Olympic trials. I made the semis. I didn't make the finals. And I took off my track spikes and didn't unlace them. I took one lap around the track in Eugene, Oregon, barefoot, and my whole life washed over me. And it was at that time that was it. Those shoes are on a bookcase right behind me somewhere here, still laced like they were in 1980. And
That's
just time to move on. And but it served me well, this sport, and so did Fordham.
biggest surprise in your career.
Um,
Did you ever surprise yourself?
yeah, I think when I ran that 4:05 as a freshman, and my best time was 7 or 8 seconds slower than that. That surprised me, and that I was the winner of the race was a guy named Eamon Coughlin who went to Villanova, a
Sure.
fabled Irishman who's a very close family friend now. And to be in a race with him and to feel like I belong there, was one of my favorite moments. I also enjoyed some of our Penn Relays moments. You mentioned a couple of them. I ran with some great guys like James DiRienzo, who eventually transferred to Georgetown, and we did some things there that I just I didn't take it. I always thought, Ed, okay, we did that. Now next week we're going to do better. I never
Mhm.
relished in the moment, and I don't know if that's a miss or not. So, but there's a lot of good moments, and there's a lot of tough times there. And then when I graduated, it was also the next year was the advent of Title IX, and the way the athletic department all athletic departments chose to deal with it at the time because it was now federally mandated, was they were taking money from men's sports to create budgets for women's sports, which I felt was insulting to women's athletes as well as the men's athletes, as well as all students, but I don't, that was just a sign, that was just the times, that was the moment, so I don't think that has anything to do with a career, but, memories are still very, very fond.
What drove you as an athlete?
Um, I had a conversation, to answer your question, years later in my business career and with Tom Brady. And I asked him what motivated him. And he looked at me, and when you're with Tom Brady, you always feel like you're the only person in the room. He looked at me and I said, what motivates you? And he said to me, self-doubt. And I think, and that was the one thing I did, particularly in high school and at Fordham, I ran out of fear. And I didn't run out of the fear of losing. I ran out of the fear of failing. And I think those are different things. You could lose and still have accomplished something. There was something about the fear of failure. And I needed to get over that. And that was probably why the 2 years in Gainesville, Florida, after I graduated, were inspirational to me, because I thought about, if you believe you belong, then you belong. So, but I felt comfort many years later that Tom Brady also had a fear of failure or self-doubt, whatever you want to call it.
Who motivated you beside you?
I'm going to be honest. I can't give you a name, but I will say this about my dad. The motivation wasn't, come on, son, go win one for the Gipper. It was more, can you think you can do this? I'm not sure you can do it. Do you think you can do it? And I think every time I ran a race, it was more about getting his attention and, quite frankly, maybe proving him wrong. Not in a harmful, malicious way, but just looked at, I did it. Looked at, I did it. And I think that was the main motivator. And I wanted Fordham to believe that they made a good investment by giving a scholarship to a kid from a couple of miles away in the Bronx.
Who comprised your cheering section?
My dad turned into, because he was nervous as all heck every time I ran, he became the team photographer. And my mom was really my cheering section. Even my two brothers took up the sport in high school. They didn't continue in college. So it's my close family. I don't, even teammates. We all rooted for each other, but in the moment, when you're at a track meet, you'd love to see your teammate do well, but you're also thinking about the race you have to run. So nobody could really just drop everything and focus on it, but I still go back. My mom is going to be 92, my biggest cheerleader. And, and I was always happy to impress her in the rare moments that I could.
How do you handle the pressure, Gene?
Behind the scenes, Ed, not well. I was like the duck, where it looks like he's smooth sailing on the placid lake, but the feet are going, underneath. I didn't handle it well. I remember I won all 7 major races in cross country at Van Cortlandt Park, including the IC4 race, the Eastern States, New York City championships. I won them all, and nobody had ever won 7 races there, and maybe not even since then. I remember crossing the finish line and sobbing. And I didn't realize at that time I was carrying all of this pressure and this stress. And I don't know that I ever handled it well, but I learned over the years that if you can channel that pressure and that stress, and you can turn it into something good. But I tried to put on a brave face when I'm very happy to admit many years later that brave face was a mask.
Suffer any injuries in your career?
In my sophomore year, I had been racing across campus on a Saturday morning for cross-country practice, and I tripped over a tree stump, and I tore some ligaments in my ankle, and I couldn't compete in the IC4 race, and that did not make Tom Byrne happy. But other than that, any real injuries? No. See, some of these guys, we had one poor guy, God bless him, I forget his name, Tom. He was a pole vaulter and he had a stroke. Can you imagine a kid
Wow.
a young kid? And you know what? this kid still wanted to pole vault, and he had limited use with one of his arms. So when I think about injuries, I don't have like some of these guys do that have an ACL tear or whatever.
Mm,
But we also grew up in a
mm,
time where we didn't know what an ACL was.
exactly. Right.
We never heard of anything called hydration. We didn't eat right. We ran on cinders and dirt and crud. Not all these
Right.
beautiful, majestic pillow-like tracks and everything they have now. Not to sound like the old guy I am, but I'm blessed that I never really had any injuries. But I do have trouble today after all those 100-mile weeks of things are a little creaky in the morning when I get up. But it's the price you pay for the life that I've had. So I wouldn't trade it in.
Which has been wonderful. Coaches, trainers, and strength and conditioning people who helped you.
Yeah, most of that happened, unfortunately, after Fordham. I do remember we had a great trainer at Fordham that everybody loved him, Jim Wilson.
Love
And
Jim Wilson.
oh my God.
Loved him. Loved him.
And then there was, I don't know if you remember, we used to go get our roll in the cage down in the bowels of the Rose Hill gym. And I think the guy's name was Tony. And you go in there and you have to return your towel, your jock, your shorts, and your shirt. And if you didn't, he wouldn't give you a new roll. But there were some of those people were very inspirational. But I don't think we had it wasn't part of the times. I don't think it was like, oh, we had a masseuse or, I look at some of these athletes now. One of my boyhood friends, Matt Centrowitz, who went to Power Memorial and then became a two-time Olympian and American record holder. He's not even the best runner in his family. His son won a gold medal in the 1500 meters in Rio, Matthew, and he had a special diet. He had a trainer. He had a sports psychologist. They have all of these things now, which is good if you can do that. With us, it was grit and determination and run like the wind and just hope you're a little bit better than the other guy.
Of all your years at Fordham, which was your favorite?
My sophomore year. And even though we had the Bobby Burns, tragedy, and the reason is I came back, I finally knew what I was getting into. I had a girlfriend on campus. There was a little bit more of a social life. I felt like I knew what I was doing as far as curriculum. And then, of course, I came off a 4 or 5 mile. So I really felt sophomore was my best year. Senior was tough. I will admit I went to Florida after, 2 years later, for 2 years because I wanted to give my sport the good old college try that I didn't give in my senior year while I was in college.
Um, any regrets?
Um, I don't think you can have regrets when you're, between 18 and 21 years old. I think what you have are, moments, experiences, good and bad. And sometimes those moments, instead of treating them like failures or setbacks, I look back on them more like they're like scars in fine leather. It makes the piece of leather almost
Mm.
look, more valuable. And I think some of those things have served me well in my business career, which I had for 40 years in the athletic industry. Some of those setbacks did, and some of the victories did, and also learning about how to temper your feelings and emotions about winning and losing. That it's a sport. As long as you felt like you did everything that you possibly could, then I don't have any regrets. I wish I could give you some.
Most cherished memory from the field of play?
Um, Wow. The most cherished memory from the field of play would have to be, even though we came in second in the NCAAs in Cobo Hall in Detroit, behind Princeton, just a few months after our own athletic department didn't think we were worthy enough to go to the NCAA championships in cross country.
What you're most proud of, Gene, in your career at Fordham?
If you're talking about my athletic career,
Hmm.
it's definitely our school records at the Penn relays and relay teams. I always felt that I wasn't serving the team as an individual. I always felt better when I was part of a relay team. And I also think that I was able to graduate and to have a career that, when I look back on it, is modest by many of my peers' standpoints. But in the McCarthy family lore, it was quite, remarkable.
Tell us about graduation day 1978 and your good friend Alan Alda.
Yeah, I don't know if he was my good friend. I do remember his speech, and he did something that I used in my business career, and I never witnessed it before. He used a sense of humor as a way to make a very serious point, and I'll never forget that. And I use it today. I also remember that. Wow, there's a guy up there, and I'm sure he's a television star and MASH and all that stuff. But I realized that, wow, I went to a school with all these famous, that a lot of these famous people went to: Vince Scully, Vince Lombardi. I mean, God, I mean, Denzel Washington was a year ahead of me in 1977, and he was on the JV basketball team. And I remember that, all these remarkable people went there, but every time they come back, they act like they're Rams. They don't act like Denzel the actor or Alan Alda the actor. And that's the way I felt about Alan Alda that day. And as I mentioned earlier, having my diploma, winning the Terrence O'Donnell Award, and having my family there is an immeasurable pleasure, one of the greatest moments of my life.
Inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1992. How'd you find out?
We had been nominated several years, and I think there's a waiting period before you can be considered, like any Hall of Fame. It was Tommy Byrne, who was no longer with Fordham, and he had called me. I was living in South Jersey at the time, and going there was, I mean, it was just, it was a moment because everybody was dressed up. We had our own table. McCarthy's were there. It was spectacular. And then years later, and this is what means the most to me, for the Hall of Fame. Years later, I went back as a visiting Hall of Famer because I wanted my son, Patrick, who was in 8th grade at the time, before we moved back to Oregon. I wanted him to see Fordham and to understand this Hall of Fame thing. And so before they had the induction ceremony, the master of ceremonies is a guy named Michael Kay. And my son Patrick says, "Dad, that's the guy that is the announcer for the Yankees." I go, "No, he went to Fordham." So anyway, he's announcing all the different people that were in the audience. And then when he got to me, and Patrick teases me about this today, he would say, like, "And there's Marianne Bellotti." Everybody would clap. And then when he got to me, he said, "And one of the greats, Gene McCarthy." And to see an 8th grader light up that the voice of the Yankees would call his dad one of the greats is probably better than going in the Hall of Fame itself.
And that's what you remember about that day of your enshrinement.
Yes, absolutely.
What are your emotions, Gene, when you come back and you see your plaque and your picture when you walk into the gym? What's that like?
First of all, as you walk in, you see some very, very famous people who have their plaque on that wall. And sometimes I feel like I'm not worthy. And then there's other times when I realize that we did something that wasn't just for us. We did something that Fordham should be proud of too. And I think that's what the Hall of Fame is for. It's not just to recognize the Hall of Famers. It's Fordham should be proud that they've cultivated all these great athletes and these great athletic achievements. And the only other thing I can tell you about seeing that plaque is, if you've ever seen it, what happened to all that hair? I had a lot of hair on that plaque. So, but anyway, it's quite stunning. When you walk down that hall and you see it, and of course you see Vince Lombardi and you see all of these famous people. Wow. I mean, I'm in the same, if we went in alphabetical order, I'd be right near Vince Lombardi, but it doesn't work that way.
I think it's fair to say that you were the personification of chasing one's dreams with hunger, desire, discipline, dedication, and consistency. These are the qualities one needs to be able to reach for the stars and touch them as you did.
I mean, that your kind words, I don't know what to say about them, but thank you. I will say this: having an all boys Irish Christian Brother education was the starter set for manhood. And then when I went to Fordham, the thing, and I noticed this when I went back, the value system that the school has. It just oozes out of not only the buildings, but out of even the young people who work there today. And I felt like it wasn't something where I reached for the stars as much as I felt it was my obligation and my vocation to embody all of those things. I don't think it was good enough just to run fast and get a trophy. I think it was how you did it. It was how you worked out, how you trained, how you treated your teammates, how you looked at your competition. And I don't think every school, and particularly in today's sports world, has those values, but I do believe they were developed there at Fordham. And it's not a small surprise that it served me in a 40, 50-year career in the athletic industry.
Gene, the floor is yours. I'd like you to, if you would please, sum up your Fordham experience and what you would like to say to the Fordham community.
Well, Ed, first of all, a legend, Ed Randall. I'm so
Oh,
excited that I get the chance to talk. No, I
what?
wouldn't
None
say,
of that.
well, it's important because this means the world to me. I would like to say that we all should feel blessed that we've had our moments there in all different times of our lives, you know, whether it was when the end of the Vietnam War, when I was there, to kids going to school during COVID. I think we all have these experiences, but what rises out of the dust is Fordham, whether it's Keating Hall, Edwards Parade, and all the majestic buildings, but also the people who occupy them. A college or university is an inanimate object. It's the people that bring it to life. And when I went back last week, I still am humbled that a kid from a couple of miles away in the Bronx could go to this majestic big university, and not only that, but have the benefit and the beauty of a decent running career, but an excellent education at the same time.
Gene, congratulations on all your accomplishments, and thank you for sharing your story with us on Ed Randall's Talking Rams.
All my pleasure, Ed. Thank you. Happy holidays.
This production has been aided and abetted by Athletic Director Charles Guthrie and the indispensable and incomparable Joe DeBarry, member of the Sports Information Directors Hall of Fame. As the great Hall of Fame broadcaster Ernie Harwell once said, I think I've done all the damage I can do. Please note no animals, especially rams, were harmed in the production of this Zoomcast, nor any special effects used. And when all is said and done, there's nothing left to say or do. Thank you, everybody, for putting up with me, and we'll see you next time on Ed Randall's Talking Rams.